In 1957, Nina Simone walked into a New York studio, recorded 14 songs in one night, and signed one piece of paper on her way out. That paper paid her $3,000. It also signed away her share of every cent those recordings would ever make. 30 years later, one of those songs became a hit all over again in a Chanel perfume ad playing on televisions across Europe. She earned nothing from it. By her own account, that signature cost her more than $1 million. And it was only the first time someone took her money. To understand how that happens to one of the most important musicians of the 20th century, you have to go back before the name. She was born Eunice Kathleen Wayman in Tryon, North Carolina, in 1933, the sixth of 8 children. She was a prodigy. By the age of 4, she was playing piano by ear in her mother's church. By 10, she was giving classical recitals, and her whole town, black families and white families both, chipped into a fund to train her. The dream was simple, and it was enormous. She was going to be the first great black classical concert pianist in America. Then the door closed. She applied to the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, one of the best music schools in the country, and she was rejected. She believed for the rest of her life that the real reason was the color of her skin. That rejection is the wound underneath everything that comes next, because it pushed her off the path she had trained for, and into the one place a black woman with her talent could actually get paid: bars. To play in an Atlantic City club, she needed a stage name her church-going mother would not recognize. So Eunice Wayman became Nina Simone, and she was good enough that within a couple of years, a record label came calling. Here is the part that matters. When she walked into that studio in 1957, she still thought of herself as a classical pianist doing a detour to make rent. She had no manager, no lawyer, no accountant. Nobody in that room was working for her. So when they slid a contract across the table at the end of a 14-hour session and offered her a flat $3,000 for the entire record, she took the cash, she signed the paper, and she walked out. She did not read it, and she had just given away the rights to the biggest song of her early career. That is the pattern that would repeat for the next 40 years. The money Nina Simone made never seemed to end up with Nina Simone. Take the man she married in 1961. Andrew Stroud was a former New York City police detective, and not long after the wedding, he became her manager. On paper, that should have protected her. In practice, he took control of the whole operation. He booked the tours. He ran the companies. Her songs were published through a company called Nina Simone, and if that name sounds a little strange, it is because it is a blend of 2 first names, Nina and Andy. The publishing that carried her name was built around his, and he worked her. Stroud understood that the real money was not in the clubs. It was in the concert halls, and he pushed her from one to the other relentlessly. She said later that she could barely sleep, that the harder she played, the less she could rest, and that he would not let her stop. In one interview, she described being treated like a workhorse. We finally have a hard number for what that was worth to him, and it is a startling one. In February 1970, when the marriage was collapsing, the Philadelphia Tribune ran it on their front page. The headline said Nina Simone was leaving a husband who earned $100,000 a year as her personal manager. $100,000 a year in 1970 for managing his own wife. Now, was he a monster, or was he the reason she became a star? Honestly, the record says both, and the documentary about her life does not pretend otherwise. He built the machine that turned a nightclub act into an international headliner. He also controlled the bank accounts, the publishing, and the master tapes of a huge amount of her work. And when they divorced, he walked away, claiming a great deal of it was legally his. Years later, She would accuse him of having embezzled $250,000 from her before he left. That accusation was never proven in a courtroom. It was her word against his. And follow the recordings themselves, because this is where it compounds. After that first Bethlehem deal, she moved from label to label. Colpix, then Philips, then RCA Victor. Different companies, different decades, and the same basic outcome every single time. She made the records, and somebody else always ended up owning them. The masters from her most famous years, the RCA recordings, would eventually end up inside Sony, the company that still controls them today. Nina Simone changed the sound of American music across 4 different labels, and she finished her career owning almost none of the actual recordings that made her famous. And she was not a minor act that slipped through the cracks. This was the woman behind Feeling Good, behind I Put a Spell on You, behind Sinnerman and Mississippi Goddamn. Songs that are still everywhere, 60 years later. She recorded more than 40 albums over the course of her career, and she was, by any measure, one of the defining voices of the century. And that is exactly what makes the money story so hard to accept. She was one of the most celebrated musicians alive, and she still could not get a firm grip on the money her own name was generating. By the end of the 1960s, she was done. Done with the industry, and increasingly done with America itself. She had thrown herself into the civil rights movement, written protest songs that got her pulled from radio playlists, and watched the country she was singing about refuse to change fast enough. So around 1970, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She stopped paying her United States taxes as a protest against the Vietnam War, and it turned her into a fugitive from her own government. She left Barbados, then Liberia, then Switzerland, then the Netherlands, and finally, France. For years she could not safely come home, because coming home meant an arrest warrant waiting for the back taxes. The most American voice of her generation spent the peak of her fame in exile. The tax problem hung over her for years. It was only after a long stretch abroad and a lawyer eventually working something out with the authorities that she could perform in the United States again without fear of being arrested at the airport. But by then, the damage was done. She had spent the years when she should have been cementing her fortune running from her own country instead. And out there, cut off from the machine Stroud had built, the money got messy. Labels she had recorded for still owed her. Royalties she had earned were not reaching her. She became convinced, and she was largely right, that she was being robbed. And this was not some vague grievance. Nina Simone would tell people that 5 different record companies owed her money, and given how many labels she had passed through and how little had ever reached her, that was not paranoia. It was arithmetic. She had spent 15 years making records that sold, and watched the checks that should have followed those sales either shrink to nothing or never show up at all. So she started doing something most artists only fantasize about. She started chasing the money down herself, in person. There is a smaller story from those years that says everything. In 1978, she recorded an album called Baltimore for a producer who had flown her out to make it. She later described the experience as being stuck in a basement in Belgium, forced to sing songs just so she could get out of there. That was her own account of making one of her own records. Which brings us to a scene she described herself, on camera, to a BBC interviewer near the end of her life. Sometime in the mid-1980s, she said, a record executive owed her money and refused to pay it. So she found out where he was. She tracked him to a restaurant in Switzerland. She brought a gun, and she tried to shoot him. She missed, and she said it plainly, almost calmly, decades later. He owed her, and she had gone to collect it the only way she felt she had left. Think about how that story usually gets told. She is the difficult one, the unstable diva who pulled a gun on somebody. What almost nobody adds is the other half of it. She was right about the money. In a 1998 interview, she put it as plainly as a person can. She said she had devoted her whole life to being a star and had absolutely nothing to show for it, that everyone out there was re-releasing and ripping off her records, and that she just needed the money. It was, in her words, as simple as that. People called that madness. It looks a lot more like a woman who watched other people get rich off her work and could never once get them to pay her for it. By the mid-1980s, the exile had caught up with her. The woman who used to sell out concert halls was playing a small club in Paris called Aux Trois Maillettes, for what one account calls a pitance. Some nights were transcendent. Some nights she would walk off after 15 minutes, or barely show up at all. She was unwell, she was drinking, she had almost no money, and there was no one steering the ship. People who saw her in those years described someone the industry had simply given up on. She had no agent working the phones for her, and no real team around her. Just a genius in her 50s, in a foreign city, sitting down at a piano when she felt like it, and walking away when she did not. The distance between who she had been and where she had ended up was enormous, and almost nobody in the business she had helped build seemed to notice. What saved her was not a label, and it was not a lawyer. It was her friends. A small group of people who loved her, including a Dutch friend named Gerrit de Bruin, an old guitarist from her band, and a manager, essentially staged an intervention. They got her out of Paris and up to the Netherlands, to the town of Nijmegen, where a doctor finally diagnosed the illness that had been tearing her life apart for decades, and got her onto medication that actually helped. And here is the detail that tells you exactly how far she had fallen. To buy an apartment there, one of the most famous singers alive had to borrow the money from her friend de Bruin, take out a small mortgage from a bank, and add in whatever she had scraped together from a run of concerts. He remembered it wryly afterward. It was an expensive flat, he said. This was one of the most recognizable voices in the world, and she bought that apartment on a loan from a friend. Before we get to how this story ends, and it is the part that still makes people angry. One quick thing. If you want more investigations like this one, where we follow the money all the way down, subscribe. And if you are watching this on your television right now and you cannot tap the screen, you can still help. Pick up your remote, open the YouTube app on your TV, and you can like this video and subscribe to the channel right from there. It genuinely helps these stories reach the people who should see them. Because what happened after Nina Simone finally found some peace is almost harder to believe than everything that came before it. She died in the south of France in April 2003 after a long illness. She was 70 years old, and the fight over her money was just getting started. Start with the will. After a lifetime of being taken from, she made a choice about where her estate would go, and it was a striking one. She left her only daughter, Lisa, a single condominium in Los Angeles. Almost everything else, the entire residue of the estate, she directed into a trust to fund the musical education of black children in Africa. Her fortune, such as it was going to children on another continent, and her own daughter was largely written out. Then it got worse, because there was never one clean pot of money to fight over. There were the master recordings, and those had been tangled up with her ex-husband for 30 years. In December 2014, a federal court entered a judgment of $84 million against Andrew Stroud's estate, in favor of Nina Simone's estate, over those recordings. And that number sounds like justice finally arriving. But you have to understand what it actually was. It was a default judgment. Stroud had defied the court's orders and hidden recordings, and when he died in the middle of the case, the judgment landed against his estate largely because his side had stopped fighting. There is no public evidence that anyone ever collected a cent of that $84 million. and Sony, which had its own competing claim to the masters, argued in court that the number wildly overcompensated the estate for recordings it did not even own, and the fight with Sony got uglier than a normal royalty dispute. Her estate went into federal court and accused Sony of running what it called a piracy ring, uploading more than 80 albums of her recordings to digital stores and streaming services without the right to do it. Think about what that claim actually means. The family was arguing that one of the largest record companies on Earth was distributing Nina Simone's life's work and, by their account, not properly paying for it. The case was eventually settled quietly, with the terms sealed, the way these things almost always end. There was no public number and no admission of wrongdoing, just another set of documents nobody outside the room gets to read. Meanwhile, her daughter, Lisa Simone Kelly, had been administering her mother's estate, and that ended badly too. The California Attorney General's office, then led by Kamala Harris, investigated and concluded that she had breached her duty and diverted money that was meant to fund that charitable trust. Court filings alleged she had taken as much as $2 million, including a $1.5 million deposit into her own company. In the 2015 settlement, she was ordered to repay nearly $6 million. She was stripped of control of the estate, and control was handed to a professional fiduciary company called San Pasquale. The family was, effectively, removed from Nina Simone's estate, and the terms were total. As part of that settlement, her daughter had to sign away rights, hand over paperwork and property tied to the estate, and agree not to publicly present herself as running it. Her only child was legally walled off from the estate she had been administering. Whatever you think of how Lisa Simone Kelly handled the money, the end result is stark. Nina Simone's fortune is now controlled by a fiduciary firm, and her own family is on the outside of it. So here is where we have landed. The woman signed away her music at the very start of her career for $3,000. And at the very end, after she was gone, that same music was still generating lawsuits and judgments and settlements measured in the tens of millions. And almost none of it was reaching the people who carried her name. And that is the cruelest part of the whole story. Nina Simone is worth more today, gone, than she was on almost any single day she was alive. Her voice became one of the most sampled and licensed sounds in modern music. Kanye West built a song on his Yeezus album around her recording of Strange Fruit. A producer took her performance of Cinnamon and turned it into the backbone of a Talib Kweli hit. Her music has turned up in tracks by Jay-Z, in films, in television, and in advertising campaigns all over the world. That song from the perfume ad, the one she was never paid for, along with songs like Feeling Good, has sold everything from cars to cosmetics for decades. The catalog she signed away at the start is now an asset that lawyers fight over. And here is the honest gap in this story. We do not actually know what that estate is worth today, or what it earns every year. Those numbers sit in private accountings that the public does not get to see. Older court filings suggested the estate was worth somewhere in the millions, but a precise, current figure simply is not public. What we do know is who is not seeing it. Her granddaughter, Nina Simone Kelly, said it out loud in 2021. "The family does not run the estate anymore," she wrote. "It was taken away from them. They get no royalties. Nothing." Her grandson, Alexander Simone, put the same thing another way. "Everybody else," he said, "is benefiting off our family name, and nothing really comes back to the family. Now you can look at that and reach for a simple villain, but the truth is more complicated and more useful than that." The estate was routed away from the family partly by Nina Simone's own will, and the fiduciary running it is enforcing terms she herself helped set. The point is not that one person stole one fortune. The point is bigger than that, and it is the whole reason this channel exists. What decided Nina Simone's money was never really her talent. It came down to ownership. Who held the master recording? Who held the publishing? And whose name was on the piece of paper at the end of the night? That same question has quietly decided the fortune of almost every artist you love, and most of them signed their version of that paper long before they understood what it meant. Nina Simone understood it eventually. She spent the back half of her life trying to undo one signature from 1957, a night she recorded 14 songs, took $3,000 in cash, and gave away the one thing that would have made her free.